Hey everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Angelique Rewers, CEO and founder of The Corporate Agent, and welcome to this week's episode of Lead Your Movement, where we talk to entrepreneurs and business leaders who are using their business in order to make a huge impact in the world. We are live today, assuming it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon while you're watching this. So that means we love to hear your comments. Please do engage with us. I think, especially today, you're going to be interested in asking our guest a lot of questions, especially if you appreciate winning big in your business so that you can do more of the things that you love to do, create more jobs, create more opportunities, have a bigger impact in the world, because that's what it is all about. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is really how to grow your business, specifically through RFPs, requests for proposals. And our guest today to help us do that is Lisa Rehurek, who is the fearless and ridiculously fun founder and CEO of the RFP Success Company. After a successful 25-year career in corporate leadership positions, Lisa's company now helps businesses win more business through RFPs. In just the past year, she and her team have helped organizations win more than $25 million in business. As an 8-time author, national speaker, and trainer, and podcast host, Lisa is disrupting the industry with her down-to-earth, get-it-done personality and fresh approach. And she is someone we absolutely adore and have way too much fun with. So please help me, everyone. Welcome to the show, Lisa. Hey, Lisa, how are you?
Hi, I'm fantastic. How are you?
Oh my gosh, I'm so good. Although you and I had a little chat back in the green room. So I had a rough night last night. And I'm like, I think I have bags under my eyes today. The joys of home ownership, right?
Exactly.
Oh my
That's a
gosh.
whole separate podcast episode,
It
your
really
evening.
is like being the business owner, the homeowner, the kids, all the things that we're always juggling through, which actually makes today's topic so apropos, because as we're going to get into here in just a minute, when it comes to winning requests for proposals and RFPs, often those are the really big opportunities that mean that you have some visibility into your revenue, your cash flow stream, which is great. But before we get into that brass tacks, I've got to start by asking you, what is the movement that you are leading?
The movement that I'm leading, I was thinking about this question, and I feel like there's kind of two movements that I'm leading because I like to be a little bit of a rebel and I can't just have one, right? The first movement that I'm super passionate about is helping people follow the path that they were meant for, right? I am so passionate about making sure that people are living in it, like driving down their own path and not worrying about what everybody else is thinking and doing and all of that. And then the second movement is kind of then helping them simplify things so that they can make that movement a reality. And things just don't have to be so hard. How can we simplify the RFP process? How can we simplify the writing of an RFP so that you can get more wins and make more money so that you can keep doing what you want to do in the world?
Oh my gosh, I love that. And how interrelated those two things are. Something
Yeah.
really struck me as you were talking about movement number one, if you will, in terms of people following the path. There are so many people out there these days, Lisa, that's like their website is find your purpose, find your, and all that. And it's so interesting to me because I feel like those of us who most help people do that actually lead with something else. Like they're
Yeah.
right. So you're the RFP success company. You're not the, find your path company. You're the RFP success company, but it's through the expression of that work and teaching people that success path that they're actually able to do those that achieve that bigger thing. Isn't that interesting? Because I always feel like the people who are actually having the biggest impact about helping people sort of live their true purpose and reach their true potential are never leading with that as their thing.
You know what's so funny about that is I tried early in my entrepreneurial days. I tried to lead with that because it's such a passion for me, but it didn't work for so many reasons that we don't need to get into. But what's so crazy is you're right. Now I'm so aligned with that and helping people make sure that when they're responding to RFPs, they're responding to things that, like I have a client who was telling me the other day that they spent so much time and money on this one particular RFP and they lost. And at the end of the day, they basically said, well, they're not really in alignment with us anyway. We don't like to work with agencies that do this, this, and this. And I'm like, well, then why were you bidding on that? Like, so it flows in line with everything that we talk about with RFPs. Bid on the things that are in alignment with your path, not somebody else's path.
So true. Because really, we don't just sit around and think up, purpose or think up alignment. It's through taking action to grow your business that you actually figure out what that alignment is. And you try on a pair of shoes and you're like, wow, that doesn't really feel aligned. That wasn't right. So I'm going to do it different next time. But it's through being in motion that you really find yourself. I love that you started there today. For those who are so look, your business works with companies from all ends of the spectrum in terms of size, those who
Yeah.
are very small micro companies and maybe some just getting started, all the way up to the big companies that need that strategic outside approach to successfully winning and really increasing the win rate on RFPs. But for the benefit of our audience who maybe are not that familiar with what an RFP is, let's talk about what a request for proposal is and why companies use them. And let's just create that so we have some shared understanding on this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So, RFP, request for proposal, is basically something that government agencies and corporations put together in order to get competitive bids on any product or service that they're selling. And when I say on any product or service they're selling, the government uses RFPs for a very high percentage of their purchases. Corporations, not always, but there is a ton of work to be had in the RFP space because it's not just this nebulous document. It is the way that they purchase their goods and services. And the only reason I'm highlighting that is because I think sometimes we get caught in this, it's just this document that you have to respond to, but no, it's how they buy all of their stuff. So there's a lot of work to be had there. And so they put out this document, this RFP, that asks you questions in order for them to evaluate all of the people that are interested in this piece of work and then choose the best that they evaluate in order to give them the contract. And actually on all ends, these contracts can be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years with extensions. So when you win one of these, it can be a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's so true. And something that's interesting. So you've been in the corporate space for a long time. I've been in the corporate space for a long time. And when I was on the corporate side of things, and I'm sure it was the same for you, I was buying a lot of things, even though I wasn't in purchasing, given my role and so close to the C-suite, I was buying a lot of things. And one thing I noticed about the RFP process, and I want you to kind of weigh in and tell me what you're seeing right now, but something we've kind of watched over the last couple of decades is that companies are kind of like a pendulum in terms of how strict they are about using an RFP. Government, it's pretty much regulated that over a certain dollar amount, they have to use RFPs
Yes.
for fairness. Companies can really choose. They can decide whether to give what's called a sole source award, right? Or they have to go that competitive bid. But I've watched the pendulum swing over the years. And I remember at one point I was leading an RFP, an annual report I was putting together. And I had a couple $1 million budget. And the company decided that I was going to have to do an RFP that year for a photographer. So you're talking about a $10,000, $15,000, maybe 20,000 total. But they decided, well, this year we're going to do an RFP for the photography. Great. So now I've got photographers responding to RFPs, right? But it was really interesting that whenever they would get when they would focus on fiscal responsibility, all of a sudden everything was going through an RFP. I would imagine, given the current state of the economy and how, companies are definitely seeing financial impact from the pandemic and obviously the recession that we're in, et cetera, that we're going to see an increase in the number of RFPs because companies are going to be in that fiscal responsibility place where they're going to watch and make sure they're getting the best price no matter what they're buying. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, what's interesting is right now we're seeing the opposite
Oh, no kidding.
because I think that what's happening right now is because, everybody's having to shift and adjust things, and they don't have the resources that they had before. They don't have the time. And so they're doing a lot more soul sourcing now. But I would agree
Frantic
with you.
purchasing. Yeah.
Yep. I would agree with you that come 2021, as things get back to whatever normal is, right? And we start to shift back into that normality, that I think we're going to see a lot more of that as well. And, right now, extended contract, sole sourcing, and all of that is pretty high on people's lists. But I agree with you for next year, later
Yeah,
next year,
that's
probably.
true. So they're frantic right now. So they're
Yep.
like, just give me what I need because I don't have time. That is true. But yeah,
Yep.
I would expect next year, as we go into that sort of, no, we have to be so responsible. We've got to get our
Yep.
profitability back up. They're going to be driving to that. So that makes this conversation today really timely, I think.
Yeah.
Because I do think we're going to start seeing a lot of RFPs next year. Once you're right, we move through that sort of, we're in that frantic window.
You know what else I think, Angelique, just to
Yeah.
piggyback on that real
Yeah,
quick, is
please.
that I think we're also going to start seeing, probably later next year, a lot more interest in small business enterprises. I think we're going to see a lot more interest in entities wanting to support the small businesses and putting those requirements out there for the larger companies to partner with small companies.
Yeah, that's I'm glad that is so true. We actually even heard it. We had our conference, The Real Deal, 3 weeks ago. We had some major corporations there, Coca-Cola, ATT, UPS, others, and they were actually talking about the fact that they're having way more meetings right now, sourcing way more from small business. One, because of the movements this year on diversity and supporting community, but also small business owners are a good deal. There's less overhead, they're more nimble, they're more agile. So I think this is a really great conversation today
Yeah.
in terms of timing about why folks need to learn from you how to really crush it on these RFPs. But before you can crush it on an RFP, you actually have to get invited. You have to be included. You can't just be like, "Oh, I heard you're doing an RFP. Here's my paper to turn in to the teacher." You have to actually get invited into that process. So, what are some of the best strategies for people to find out about RFPs that are coming out that they can compete on, or get invited to the ones that aren't publicly, in the government, it's public knowledge. In the private sector, they don't tell the world that they've got an RFP coming out.
Right.
So, what are some strategies for that?
The best strategy, the gold star strategy, is to have a relationship with the entity that is going to put that RFP out. And that's part of your business development strategy and knowing who you're targeting. And the bigger the company you are, the more likely you've got that. The smaller you are, the less likely. But you need to have some sort of a strategy to know, who do you really want to work with? Because if you are throwing darts at every RFP that comes across your plate, you're going to lose and you're going to waste a ton of time and money. So the more targeted you can be, and the outreach to those, especially in the corporate space, because that's the only way you're going to find out about these RFPs. You've got to be building those relationships with, whether it's the supplier diversity, if you're a small diverse business, or the entity itself, or their internal purchasing departments. You've got to be building those relationships. On the government side, same thing, but there are also services out there that you can hire that will send you RFP notices. And if you're new, actually, I recommend always having those notices, because you see what's coming out. Mm-hmm. Just not to rely on them, really. BidSync is one. It's a little bit higher price. There's one called findrfp.com, and it's literally like $30 a month, I think. And you just put in your keywords, and then you'll get an email every so often that gives you the open RFPs, and you can start to see what's out there. Again, I don't recommend relying on those, because I think then you're just going in cold, but it will start helping you determine what agencies are putting things out, what kind of things they're looking for in your industry and your world. But the best thing, again, build the relationships and have them call you. Best case scenario.
No, I love it's so true. I mean, companies do not go look for the resources, right? Like they
Right.
don't go out online just searching, and they
Yep.
really rely on what's already in their Rolodex.
Yep.
One of the things that I used to say when I was a decision maker, and sometimes vendors would contact me, not sometimes, a lot of times, right? But I would say, well, have you reached out to our procurement team to at least get yourself in our database? So when we decide to do an RFP, that you're tagged for that, and we can consider you. What was really interesting though is how few of them actually did that. They didn't want to be bothered,
Right.
they didn't want to. So we would say, look, this is, get with them, make sure you're in the database. We did a study a couple of years ago. We looked at every single Fortune 500 website. We literally had our team go to every single Fortune 500 website, and
Wow.
it was 400, I want to say 473, I think was the number, of the Fortune 500 actually had a way through their website to get into their vendor database.
Yep.
It was impossible to keep that list up to date, but because people constantly change their website. But I mean, they want you to be in there. I absolutely love that. But you're right. At the end of the day, it's all about the relationship. So now you
Right.
get the RFP. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, but to your point, there's 473 out there. So you're never going to keep up with that. That's why you've got to niche down and target. And you can go to agency websites in the government. You can go to corporations and just pick up the phone and call them very simply and say, how do I get on your vendor list? If it's not clear on the website, call them and they'll be happy to help you. Most of them will be happy to help you. And then you'll get notified of them. And that's your first kind of foot in the door before building that relationship. Love that.
And for those of you who are new, nonprofits and universities and colleges and K-12, and healthcare organizations, they all use these as well, you guys. So if
Yeah.
that's your space, don't overlook it. So okay, so now you've done your niching, and you've said, these are the organizations that I really want to make sure. These are like my 15 dream clients, and I really want to get RFPs from them. I've reached out, I've gotten them my information, and now an RFP lands on my desk. What's the first thing I should do when I look at that RFP?
The first thing you should do is look at the RFP seriously and get started. I don't know how many times a week we get calls from people that say, we've got an RFP, but it's due on Thursday. Can you help us? And it's been sitting on their desk for a month. And I'm like, no, they gave you 6 weeks for a reason. There is no way. I mean, production and final look will take 3 days
Right.
alone. So, no, you cannot put an RFP together in a week. Unless it's just a little checkbox thing. Look at the RFP and get moving right away. So that's number one. Number two, so we always suggest people putting together a calendar and reverse engineer it. I just go to Word and I pull up a calendar template, and we put in the end date, the due date, and then we put in the delivery date because sometimes we want to deliver it ahead of time. And then we reverse engineer everything else. So you can see that, guess what? Writing has to be done a couple of weeks before the due date, easily, depending on how big the RFP is. And then you got to make assignments and get working. So that's really what happens when that RFP hits your desk. But please pay attention to it right away.
Oh my gosh, and those deadlines,
Oh,
because that is the one thing I feel like especially small business owners might not understand if they're just getting their feet wet with RFPs. There are no extensions. There are
nope.
no extensions because the whole point is a level playing field for everyone. They, even if they want to make an exception for you, in most cases they cannot.
Right. There might be an amendment and they might extend it themselves, but they're not going to do it for you. And I've had people
Right.
ask that before. Can we just call them up and ask them if they can extend the due date? And I was like, well, you can, but no, don't do
Right.
that.
Yeah, you can, but don't no. We were on, so I take those deadlines so seriously. So a couple
Yeah.
of years ago, my company won a 3-year IDIQ contract, indefinite delivery, indefinite
Yep.
quantity contract, for those of you who don't know that alphabet soup. And it was with the government. government. It was a great contract, had a huge ceiling on it in terms of the dollar values. And it was really interesting because we submitted everything on time, Lisa. You're going to love this because you're going to know why this happened. So we submitted everything, but boy, we had to pull all-nighters. It was crazy. We were scrambling because it was a really short deadline. So we're like hustling. So we get it in. And then at like 5:05, so the deadline's 5 o'clock, right? 5:05, an email comes out from the company going, we've decided to extend the deadline. So you know what happened? We're the only ones who got it in.
Right.
Right. And so they were like, oh, shoot, now we have to extend that deadline. But honestly, people should not have hinged their hopes to that. Like that was
No.
they just lucked out that everybody blew the deadline.
It is so true, and the deadlines are painful. I mean, I will tell you, if you have to ship something, please don't ship it so that it gets there on the day of the deadline. Ship it so it gets there the day before. In the government world, and even in some large corporations, finding the right building to deliver that to, and you're relying on FedEx and UPS, who have a hard time sometimes finding my front door, right?
Right.
So there's
Yeah.
so many. I'm hoping that we're getting away, because of all the COVID stuff, that we're getting away from hard copy sending, and that people are going to get used to email now. But man, those are brutal. And if you miss it, you're just done. All of that time and effort.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's Liliana, it's IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, means it's open-ended. So there's
Sky's the limit.
a top dollar amount, but it's kind of open-ended on there. So, the other piece of that to the deadline, Lisa, because we had this happen with another government contract, was that we got ours in, and right after we got ours in, because I don't wait till the last minute, the entire website went down. And so we got ours in, but I was sitting there looking at it going like, people are crying and sweating right now because the site's down, and the question is going to be, when are they going to open it up, and are they going to extend the deadline? Do they even know that this is happening? So, it's just, and you could spend 3 weeks responding, 4 weeks. I mean, obviously the big multi-million dollar ones could be months responding. And to have to lose it at the last minute because your FedEx box is lost, or because, a website goes down, that's really not something that you want to do. What about you get the RFP and you're looking at it? What are some of the things people should think about in terms of, should I even compete on this RFP or not?
Yeah, some of the deal breakers that you want to look for are insurance requirements. Look at the financial requirements and what they ask you for, especially if you're a small business, because sometimes they ask for audited financials, and you've got to know pretty early in the process what you can and can't do, and get your CPA or whoever working on that. Sometimes they ask for proposal or performance bonds. That can be a deal breaker. And then I look for signs always of, is this potentially wired for somebody? If the due date is really, if it's a really narrow response time, sometimes that's an indication that they might have somebody in mind already. Or if the requirements are really specific, like we need 2.75 actuaries that have only worked in these 2 states and have 10 plus years of experience, something like that. That's a little bit weird. And then people, please, again, small businesses, I'm talking to you, read the terms and conditions and have your lawyer look over them. There's always something in there about, on the government side, particularly limits of liability and all of these things that you really want to make sure are not deal breakers for you. So those are the first things that I look at, outside of looking at the timeline and putting that calendar together.
That is so true. One of the government contracts that we went after did have those audited financial requirements, and it was tough. It was
Yeah.
really, and so those are big. Oftentimes, there is a question period.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you get it and you say, "Yeah, I think I wanna go for this." They're looking for coaches. Coaching actually now is being so
Right?
commoditized, Lisa, and so is consulting in many places that they are actually using RFPs to identify their outside trainers, speakers, coaches,
Yes.
consultants, etcetera, right? So there is a period of time where you often get to ask a question, and of course, all the people who are competing, all the outside vendors are going to see all the questions and they're going to see all the answers. What is some advice that you have for folks around how to use that opportunity to ask a question before you start putting pen to paper responding to an RFP, and what should you never do? Like what are some big don'ts?
So the first thing is, again, make sure you're reading through that RFP really well and getting your team, legal, financial team involved. Because if they ask you questions, and this always happens after that Q&A period, and you're like, "Ah, I should have asked that question," but get them involved to ask questions as well. Um, there's two schools of thought on the Q&A period. The one school of thought is, hold it tight to your chest. You don't want to ask too much because you don't want to give things away to your competitor. For me, I'm like, you know what? If you have a question you need to ask it, because you should trust yourself enough to know that you're still going to blow the competition out of the water,
Right.
and you'll be able to take that answer and do something better with it. So, don't worry so much about the competition. Worry more that your solution is the right solution and the best solution, and that you're going to knock that out of the park in the proposal. Ask what you need in order to understand, why are they doing this now if that's not clear and you don't know this up front? What is their ultimate outcome that they want? You need to understand that in order to write to that RFP. So ask the questions you need to ask. So my big don't would be, don't be afraid. Don't go into that in fear
Yeah.
or in, oh my gosh, it's all about my competition. Just trust yourself.
I think that is such good advice. I'm such a believer in being able to get those questions answered, so that you're not making assumptions. It's so true. And I love what you just said about believe that even if your competitors see that question and that answer, it doesn't matter. You can still blow them away. That isn't going to be the competitive advantage that you
Yeah.
have. I should say for those of you who've never done RFPs before, that there are rules that they will tell you around RFPs, and there can be rules like you can't talk to anybody at the company during certain windows of time. You can't engage with them. And so you can disqualify yourself. So I just want to mention that when Lisa said you need to read the RFP, she meant actually you need to read the whole RFP. You need to read the whole thing, not just the subheads throughout the RFP. You actually need
Right.
to read the RFP because there are rules like that. I mean, I've seen some crazy rules about, and what can get you disqualified.
Yeah, and even in the production of it, it's got to, your margins have to be at least an inch. Your font has to be a certain size. You've got to do it on recycled paper. I mean, there's all sorts of rules there too, and you need to know that. And there's prep work you can do up front instead of waiting until the very end.
Yep.
I feel like there's a couple of questions that I
Yeah,
think
I was
that
gonna
we
say
should
some
address.
good ones. Yeah, please
Yeah,
do dive in.
yeah, so Deborah asks, could you share some examples beyond government RFPs? Yeah, corporations put out RFPs all the time. I think that people, like, the Boeings of the world and the,
Oh yeah.
I mean, we could just go on and on. Disney, Toyota, all of these companies put out RFPs all the time for, as Angelique said, service type things, consultants, trainers, coaches, but also products, widgets, food and beverage type things. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there that they purchase through RFPs. So you've got to kind of do a little bit of recon and figure out what your targets are buying, sole source versus RFPs.
Yeah, that is such and nowadays, well, even that photography example, we did an RFP on a
Yeah.
photographer. We used to do RFPs in the defense sector on mural artists
Ooh,
and
interesting.
and on clay models. So there were times, Lisa, when I had to get an RFP to ship a tank or a helicopter or an airplane, like a jet to the Paris Air Show or something, right? Like we would have
Yep.
to I had to get a mini sub, somewhere once. But other times I couldn't take, like, you guys could understand, I was not able to take an aircraft carrier to a trade show floor, right? Like can't put an aircraft carrier. So we would do RFPs, Lisa, on clay models, like
Yeah.
companies that could, artists that could create clay models for us. But even now we're seeing it on entertainers. We're seeing it on developing curriculum. Health and wellness is a big one. Health and
Yeah.
wellness experts is huge right now. Culture change experts. I mean, all of that, copywriters, branding experts, social media
Everything.
experts, everything now, is really, and to your point, when they have an urgent issue, they just buy. But if it's something they're planning for next year, they're going to look and say, let's make sure, let's have these people compete really the whole point of an RFP is so that companies can compare apples to apples.
Yes.
Because if you go to a website, one website covers this information. You go to this website. So it's like if you have an RFP and every competitor, if every coach has to answer the exact same 20
Yep.
questions and they all have to present their information in the exact same format, it makes it easier for the company to compare apples to apples. I mean, that's really, would you agree, what they're trying to do?
Yeah, that and, no doubt they're price checking too, right?
Oh,
They're looking for price. I think we're
1000%.
seeing a lot of PPE
Yep.
right now with COVID. There's a ton of RFPs out there for that.
Oh,
But even, I was going to mention too, when Amazon was looking for their headquarters, they put out RFPs that the states or the cities had
cities.
to respond to. So, I mean, it runs the gamut. We had one not too long ago that was responding to an RFP for casters, just the wheels that go on certain equipment. So little tiny stuff to big, huge monstrosities, right?
We're
All
just
over the board.
Yeah, and we're just seeing it more and more and more in the services space. Like more
Yeah,
and
I
more and
love that.
more companies are trying to, it's one thing to compare pricing on a paperclip.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like, it's one thing to have an RP on casters, and it's like, well, what are your measurements and what is the margin and all of that? And what's your delivery schedule and what's your customer service response time? It's a whole other thing for a company to try to buy the invisible, right? Like
Yeah.
when they're trying to
So
buy the
hard.
invisible and they're trying to say, like, okay, but what are we getting and how do we compare, this corporate expert consultant to this corporate expert consultant, and what they're actually going to do for us and what they're going to charge us and what we're actually getting for our money. And I think we've been watching that in the service expert services space. Really, RFPs become such a big thing because companies are so tired of getting a fancy branding on the front end, but getting such little value on the back end for their
Mhm.
money. And so they're trying so hard to figure out how can we make
Yes.
a better buying decision, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And there's a question about, particularly with the UN, seems rates of pay are very, very low. And it's hard to know that piece of it, right? The price, because they are, and this actually goes to Phyllis's question about RFIs.
Mhm.
There are a lot of times where government agencies and corporations put out an RFI and maybe they're price shopping. Um, and there's not really a way to know, to be honest with you. Sometimes they're price shopping, sometimes they really are shopping for the information that they need to put together a RFP. They need more information and all of that in order to put out that RFP that's going to be relevant and give them the information that they need. So yes, there is the price piece. You have to decide as an entity, are you a Walmart or are you a Target? And if you're a Walmart, then you're going to have to compete in price. You're going to have to go after those and know that you're the low bidder. But if you're a Target, don't go after the ones that seem really tight on pricing because it's going to kick you in the butt every single time.
Yeah, it really, and not every company is looking for the
No,
lowest price. I
no.
think, can you talk to that? Because
Yeah.
I think there's a misconception
Mhm.
that just because there's an RFP, all they're doing is bargain shopping versus looking for the best solution.
I 100% agree with you. I think it used to be the case 10 years ago, but people have gotten burned and they understand. I think the buyers are more sophisticated now and they understand that there's value. It's not just about the bottom line price, there's a value associated with it. On the government side, it can be a lot easier to know because in the evaluation criteria, cost is 40% or 50%. But you'll see more and more that it's 20 to 30% now, where it used to be 40 to 50%. On the corporate side, it's hard to know, but it's best if you, again, you've got to do your research on those corporations. You've got to, and this takes time, but you've got to learn their buying patterns. And you can tell a little bit by other companies that are in there, your competitors or other companies that they're buying from. If you understand your industry the way you should understand your industry, you're going to know if those are the low priced or the higher priced or middle of the row companies. So you just have to do some recon on that to really, really get in touch with it.
Well, that goes back to do your homework, understand who you're targeting, know your
Yep.
prospects, because it is not the same for everyone.
No.
And even within a company,
Right.
different divisions, different geographies, different departments can handle it so differently. If you're talking about supply chain, what they're looking for is so different than what human resources
For sure.
is looking for.
Yes.
So I think that's just really important. So what's the number one? So you go through, so you get the RFP, you do everything right, you build those relationships, you get the RFP, you read it, you build your deadlines, you're going to follow all the rules, you bake in the time you need, you take advantage of that Q&A period when you can ask your questions and then you dive in. What's the number one reason that companies lose, even though they did all of those steps right up until then? What's the number one reason they lose?
Yeah, I'm going to give you two reasons because,
Okay.
again, I'm a rebel.
Because you're a rebel.
The number one reason people lose is because they don't answer the question. I mean, plain and simply, I ask evaluators all the time, and that is always in their top 1, 2, or 3. They don't answer the question, and it's crazy how you think that's so simple, but it is not. Pay attention to the way they've asked the question. And when I say they don't answer the question, I'm not saying you leave it blank, but I mean you pontificate about something that isn't even remotely close to what they asked for. Give them what they ask for, because that is the only way that they can evaluate you on the other end. That is number one. Answer the damn question the way that they have asked it. It's so frustrating. That's number one. Number two is that you have to prove that your solution is the best solution. This is not just really about answering the question. It is about showing the value and building the trust that you are the right partner. Look, everybody else that's bidding on that proposal has the qualifications. Mostly, right? Everybody that is bidding has the qualifications, has the capabilities. So you can't just go in there with your qualifications and capabilities and think that it's going to be okay. You have to think about the what's in it for them. Stop worrying so much about you and think about what's in it for them in your solution. And when you do that, tying your solution to their need, again, another reason why you've got to do that recon ahead of time, because you'll know more about that than just what's written in the RFP. That's going to get you the win, is building the trust and giving them the solution that they want and need, focusing on their what's in it for them.
Oh my gosh, amen, sister. Let me tell you something. When I used to have to read RFPs, because I did work in the defense industry, I did
Yep.
work in the energy industry, I worked in the global consulting industry. We used RFPs a lot, right, for things that we purchased and did. Sometimes we had to, sometimes we wanted to. What was shocking to me to that point, aside from people not like they would just pontificate about whatever because they were avoiding the question, right?
Right.
But what was really fascinating to me, Lisa, and I bet you and your team, when you go into work with folks on RFPs, you see this all the time, is that people would say, like, they'd go on and on and on about some methodology they have. Or they'd go on and on and on about, well, we have this tool, we have this framework, we have this 12-step checklist, we have whatever. But they never complete the thought. here's why this means this is the best solution for your company. They don't
Yeah.
actually say the flipping words. They don't say, here's why this is good news for you. Here's why this makes us the best possible solution. Here's why our clients always tell us we were the best choice for them after they had previously made bad choices. Like, they don't literally spell it out in
Yes.
like step-by-step letters. This is why that we are the best solution for you. This is why you should select us because. And it's interesting because people don't say that. They don't say it. And I
I
mean,
know.
I have read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of responses to RFPs, and no one says that.
I know. And Angelique just gave you words to use. Use those. Keep it simple so that they can consume and absorb what you're saying to them. And you have to spell it out that simply. I say the same thing when you get to a process. I'll read like this paragraph this big on, step one is blah, 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 blah. Or they don't even say step one. They just mush
It's
this
just
process
mushed
into
together. Yeah, it's mushed.
literally spell it out. Step one, bam. Step two, bam. That's the same thing. The other point that I want to make is when you're answering a question, start with the why, then give them the what, and then give them the how. Because I'm
That's
going to tell you,
brilliant.
you've got skimmers that are not going to read the how, and they don't care about the how. They just care that you can get it done. And you want to hit those, you want to smack those skimmers right out of the gate. So you should write a 1 to 2 sentence, smack them in the face with the why at the beginning of every single question that you answer.
That is gold, guys. That is gold. I mean, I feel like this is one of the reasons why, whether you are a small company or you're a major corporation, because honestly, I have supported from the business development marketing side of the house. I've had to support proposal teams inside of major companies. And I will say that they are too close. Their nose is too close to the bark of their own tree. The fish can't see the water. The
Yep.
sharpest knife can't carve its own handle, right? We can go through all of them. Fish don't know they're wet. Does anybody else have another one? I'm out. I got 4.
Can't see the picture
I
when
got
you're inside
4,
the
you guys.
frame. Yeah.
But this is also why bringing your team in, especially I would say to those mid-market and those bigger companies, can be so valuable, Lisa, because people think that they're saying the obvious, but because they've read their own stuff so much, they've drank their own Kool-Aid for so long, they don't even realize that
Yeah.
they're not saying the obvious. What are some of the other reasons that companies bring you in from the outside, even when they have a proposal team? They're like, or, it might be a small business and the owner's like, no, I always write the RFPs myself. Why do companies bring you in? And what does having that outside perspective mean for them?
Yeah, they bring us in for what you just said, right? That objective review to come in and ask the questions that they're not even able to think of, or to close the loop on things that they feel like are already closed because they're just so close to it, right? They bring us in to help them with response management if they need an extension of their team. One of my favorite things they bring us in for is that strategy, that upfront. How do we differentiate ourselves? How do we showcase that we are the right ones for this opportunity? And what is that theme that's running throughout the RFP to make sure that, or throughout the response, to make sure that we are hitting the what's in it for them, to make sure that we are showcasing ourselves, heads and tails above everybody else. And then, of course, they bring us in for business development strategy, that upfront strategy that we've been talking about, that is even before the RFP hits the plate, and training and development to make sure that the teams are all rowing in the same direction and things like that. And really what that allows them to do is that allows them to get, like you said, that objective view. It allows them to get expertise from, we are a team of experts that have been doing this for a really long time, and we are constantly talking to evaluators. We're reviewing gazillions of proposals a year. So we're seeing things that they couldn't possibly ever see or have access to because they're busy running their businesses.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, and that's obviously I've gotten a chance to get to know you and your team and the work that you guys do. And I think that one, it is obviously bandwidth, but that strategic outside
Yeah.
perspective, you are so close to your own messaging. You don't even realize half the time that you're not saying what the client needs to hear. You're putting everything through your translator, through your,
Yep.
how your brain thinks about it and not from the client. And I think one of the questions, and then I'm going to ask you for sort of a ninja strategy if you have one you want to share with everybody. But one of the things that I like to do with RFPs is constantly ask, so what? After every paragraph is just sit down with the
Beautiful.
team and go like, so what? So who the hell cares? So great. So it's 3 inches. So it has 7 parts. So there's 6 steps. So what? Like,
Why did
and
I
that,
care?
and just like constantly, playing devil's advocate, asking that so what question. What's a ninja trick that you have or ninja strategy that you have?
One of my favorite ninja strategies is thinking about the behavioral style of the evaluators on the team. And not that you're going to
Ooh.
necessarily know, but generally people fall into they're either people focused or they're task focused. And then they're either, the task focused people tend to be very bottom line. And then there's the ones that buy with their head and the ones that buy with their heart. And
Mm.
you've got to hit all of that in your proposal. And, a lot of times what we'll do is it will be based on who's writing the bulk of it or who's leading the charge on the writing. And if I'm a very statistical type of person, I'm focused on that in my RFP response. But how are we getting to the emotions of the people that buy with their hearts? So you've got to make sure that, and this is a whole conversation that we could have for another hour, right? But you've got to make sure that you're hitting for all of those people. Like I talked about the skimmers, you've got the people that are just going to skim
Mm.
because they don't have time. You've got people that want the detail. So how do you make both of them happy?
Mm.
And that's the trick. But if you pay
Brilliant.
attention to that, you're going to be you're going to wipe your competition out
That's
easily.
brilliant. That is brilliant. And, you've had some stories of folks who thought that I just want to talk about this. Now, we're going to take a couple of quick questions before we
Okay.
wrap up here because I see a couple of great ones. But can you just address? I feel like we have to talk about this, that more doesn't necessarily mean better.
Oh,
Can we please talk about
oh
that?
my gosh. I have a story from my early days in a large consulting firm, and I was really new to RFPs, and I'm sitting at this board table with the internal team, and they're talking about all the stuff that we're going to add to our response. And they get so excited because they're like, oh my gosh, we've got this report, and let's show them that we can do this, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, we're overdoing it. But I was new. I was low on the totem pole. I was afraid to speak up. And we ended up sending them 3 3-inch binders of our response. And guess what? That went straight into the garbage can because I met somebody from that company not long after that. And they said, oh, we remember that. We didn't even read it. We threw it right in the trash. So more is definitely not better. Keep it simple. You've got these evaluators have anywhere from 3 to 10 to 12 of these to read. Come on, give them a break.
Yeah, that is, oh my gosh. And yeah, wow. I mean, putting all that work in and then to
Oh,
literally find out that your work went straight into the trash can, like that is it reminds me of the Mark Twain quote, or at least the quote attributed to Mark Twain, right? It's urban legend a little bit, but I would have written you a shorter letter if only I had the time.
right.
And
It
right?
doesn't
And
take
so
time.
it actually tells the client that instead of you doing the work to edit down to what's most important, you're making them figure it out. And
Yeah.
when I was on the other side of that, when I was on the corporate side, and we would have, graphic design firms and PR agencies sending us RFP responses, I would always think to myself, well, if this is how they handle the RFP and they're not making my life
Mhm.
easy now, why would I hire them? Because they're not going to make my life any easier once they have. If they're not willing to make my life easy now to win the work, once I've already given them the big fat check, they're not going to make my life easy. And so
No.
I thought that was a really, like, that was always how I saw it from the customer side. make my life easy when I'm trying to buy from you, or
Yes.
I know you're not making my life easy when I'm working with you.
Yeah, give them a sigh of relief. If they can feel their shoulders, as they're reading through your proposal, man, that's magic. Their shoulders are relaxing. There is it is your job to respond to what they're asking for, and you will have the desire and the inclination to give them more because you're like, oh my gosh, but if they did this, this would be better. That is your job to do after you win the contract. You win the contract, then you can upsell till the cows come home. But the only way you're going to win is to answer it and give them what they're asking for now.
Love it. Love it. There's a couple of great questions here. I love this question that just popped up here from Patty. How do we protect our IP in the RFP process?
Yep. So there, you got to read the terms and conditions, and that's for corporate or government. Corporations sometimes will be more. Well, I shouldn't even say that. You can negotiate the terms and conditions sometimes, and that's often a question you want to ask in the Q&A. If you don't like the terms and conditions, ask if they will accept exceptions to the terms and conditions, and build that in to what you want to protect if you need to.
Absolutely. And then Deborah asked, how would you distinguish between RFP or RFQ?
Yeah, an RFQ is usually very short. It's just asking for a quote for very specific services. Sometimes they're doing it because they already know everything that they want and they literally just need to see prices, or sometimes they do it because they're price checking. And then the RFP is much more robust. They're going to ask you a lot more in-depth questions. They want to know a lot more about the company, a lot more about your solution.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like you're never going to see an RFQ on a consulting engagement that's
Probably
complex,
not.
right? Like
Yeah.
you're going to see it on like paper products, brake pads.
Yes, the PPE, all the PPE stuff that's out right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, the casters.
exactly.
Yeah.
You need N95 masks. So,
Yes.
okay, great. So what's the quote? But usually expert services, value added type
Yeah.
things, software,
Yeah.
that's a really involved process. I love Lisa's question here too. Lisa Smith, Lisa Smith's question. Obviously a lot of us are very familiar within the government space, the NAICS code. Sorry, little alphabet soup there. Goes right along with ID,
Right.
IFIQs, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. Talk about corporate. I certainly know my experience with that, but in terms of how that translates to the corporate space.
Oh, that's a good question. I think that on the corporate space, it's more about, oh my gosh, my mind just went blank with there's the whole DUNS number, and I think there's categories for DUNS, but there's something else. And Angelique, you might be able to answer this better than I actually from the corporate side.
Yeah. The major companies that I've both worked like with and for actually did use NAICS codes just but not relied on them. They had their own
Yeah.
categories. They really had their own categories of, we're going to decide how we're plugging you into our system, which is one of the reasons why Lisa's point earlier, where she was saying to you guys about really getting to know the companies that you want to target and have conversations with them, because they're not wedded to those codes. They
No.
can create whatever wonky system they want to create. And you need to ask, are you guys following NAICS codes? Do you guys have your own codes? Like, what are you using as part of that? And certainly, DMB has some categories at a high level, so they might follow those. But yeah, it's really about asking. It's interesting. I feel like recently we've seen it crop up more with corporate, that they like the codes. And I think it's because they're looking for standardization.
Yeah.
But, every company is different. And I think there's nothing better than getting on the phone and asking. That
100%.
is like at the end of the, people are afraid to ask the questions. What's really interesting is when you ask an informed question, when you phrase it to them as, listen, some companies recently we have found really are relying on these codes. What are you guys doing to, like, how should I make sure that you have me in all the right categories in your system? And they'll be thrilled that you asked.
Yep. And that's a really great point. And Karin just put SAIC, that was the other one I was thinking of. But,
Yeah.
Our experience with corporations is really to what Angelique just said. They mostly have their own categories.
Yeah.
They're generally very happy to give those to you to make sure you cross over, because when you're in coaching, consulting, training, there are generally multiple codes that you would fit into, or categories that you would fit into. But definitely just call them and ask. You might have to call them a few times, but yep, that's part of the recon.
And then let's take this one final question here before we tell folks how to connect with you. What is the best way to present the other team members or companies that are a part of the team the RFP wants you to list? And I love this question, especially because small and mid-sized companies often team up with other independent contractors, other small companies. You might be a 100-person small enterprise, but you want to bring on a 10-person small company that it has an expertise to fill a hole that you don't have. What are some tips for that? And actually, that's one of your areas of expertise, Lisa. I mean, when you're working with a lot of these companies, whether it's internal teams that you're bringing together or multiple sort of third parties that are coming together, that you kind of help them gel that in an effective way. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, you know what? Here's what I would say is that this is a big area that people mess up all the time, because you get so worried about how to, delineate in the proposal. But what you have to think about is that if they feel like it's disjointed, they're going to feel like they have too much to manage, and they're going to have to manage all these multiple entities. In your proposal, you have to showcase that while we are partnering with this team, we work as one cohesive team, and it's all under the management umbrella of this client services manager or this project manager or whatever that looks like. Anytime that you can give them where you can showcase that you've worked together before and how that has worked out successfully, that's beautiful. But you want to make sure that they understand it's going to be easy for them and seamless for them. They're not going to feel like it's 3 different companies or 2 different companies. It's, for their purposes, it's all one company. You're just bringing in the expertise to supplant your team.
So there's a great quote for that. It's
Oh,
very
good.
politically incorrect, but I'm going to share it anyway. And that is, companies want to have one throat to choke.
True. It's
Yeah,
true.
one throat to choke. So the idea being that they don't want to they don't want to hear when you call like Jennifer to complain that like the brake pads aren't there, that Jennifer's like, well, that's not our fault. Acme Brake Pads is our, strategic partner. So call and yell at them, right? They just want that one throat to choke. So, but that's like that. I mean, that's really from the decision maker's perspective to that whole, are you going to make our lives easier, right?
Yep.
And it does. It comes through if it feels very disjointed. I think that's some great advice. So I'll go ahead and I don't want to let this question from Janet go. And then but just do you work with government entities? If so, how is the RFQ RFI process and strategy different from non-government entities? So you guys do work, and I'm going to send people to your website and everything here. You guys work with small business and big business to help them win RFPs in the public sector and the private sector, right?
Correct. Both. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it is different. It is different. And I do think, can I just say, and then correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, that one of the big differences is that there's more cost pressure to go with lowest bidders, more on the government side, whereas corporate really can, even if it's the most expensive bidder, if they want to go with the most expensive bidder, if they think that is the best damn solution for their company, they're going to say, screw it, we'll pay an extra $1 million because we want that.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And Janet, to your question, it really is honestly, the RFQ RFI process is different, to Angelique's point, within government agencies. Even in like one state, it will vary sometimes, and it's just all over the place. But I think that Angelique pretty much hit that one out of the park.
Lisa, I feel like you and I could talk about we geek out
Forever.
on
We geek
RFPs.
out.
Lisa, if I feel like just shooting the shit with somebody on RFPs, I can call Lisa and be like, let's talk RFPs. And we think this stuff is fun. I do think it's fun because it is a bit of a game. and I'm competitive, you're competitive, Lisa. We enjoy the win, like, right? We don't have to win, but we enjoy the win a lot. And you put out, man, you put out some ridiculously amazing content aside from writing books on martinis. So, like, mad love to you for the books you put out on martinis. But I mean, gosh, the stuff you put out on RFPs and the work you guys are doing on RFPs. And we just really graced the surface today of some basic blocking and tackling. But the truth is, what you guys are doing at the RFP Success Company really gets so freaking strategic and really shakes up the game. And there's so much bad advice that's been out there for 30 years, 40 years on RFPs. And you have really turned that shit on its head. So, where can people go to connect with you, to get more information from you? Because look, if they're going to go after RFPs, they need you in their pocket.
I love it. Thank you for that. Yeah. So we have a podcast, and I would love for you all to join us on our podcast, which is the RFPSuccessShow.com. And that will give you some insight into our guests and even more talk about RFPs. And then we would love to have a conversation with you. If you are struggling, if you need some help, hit us up for a conversation and see how we might be able to support you. And you can just send an email to wecanhelp@rfpsuccess.com. So again, it's wecanhelp@rfpsuccess.com. And let's just get you on the phone with one of our team members and let's have a conversation about how we can support you.
That's awesome. And your website, let's give that to everyone as well.
Yep. Website is the rfpsuccesscompany.com. And there's a ton of stuff out there. Like Angelique says, we do a lot of content because I'm constantly wanting to, I get very excited about our learning, and I want to share that because I want to help you all get better and win more business.
And it's good stuff. And she's so fun. She makes it so fun, you guys. I can't say, I have such mad love for Lisa, and I've just enjoyed the hell out of her and the content she's putting out and the work she's doing. It's really great stuff. And it's a breath of fresh air in the RFP space, Lisa. You need to, I hope every organization looking for an expert on RFPs has you on their stage, because they definitely need your perspective. Thank you so much for being on, everybody. Lisa, thank you for being on. You guys had great questions today. This was amazing. We'll see all of you guys next Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, for another great hour. We'll see you then. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. Bye-bye.